Chapter 15 of Tractate Yevamos discusses further points in the laws of a widow whose husband vanished overseas. The first Mishnah says if a woman went with her husband overseas and they weren't having any marriage issues and she came back and reported that her husband had died, she can do Yibum. If they weren't having marriage issues, but the world was very chaotic at the time with wars, or they were having marriage issues and there was peace in the world, she's not believed if she says her husband died. Rabbi Yehuda says we only ever believe her if she comes back crying with her garments torn. The rabbis say we believe her even if she doesn't show signs of mourning. The Gemara clarifies points on the wording and says the issue by wartime is that she might have seen her husband injured when he actually survived. It's also said that famine is even stricter than wartime, that a woman is only believed here if she says she actually buried him. A building collapse, snakes and scorpions, and some say a plague are similar to wartime by these laws. This is discussed. There's for the debate along with some specific cases where a fire burnt down a couple's house and the woman escaped, saying her husband was inside. Even if you find a burnt corpse in the house, that's insufficient to assume it's the husband, as he also could have escaped and that corpse could have been somebody else. And there's further debate on these laws, and there are additional unique cases brought. It also defines what constitutes argument between a couple by these laws. Some say it's at the point where the woman says that she was divorced before a witness, although the witness denies this, and this is further debated. New Mishnah. Beis Hillel says we only believe a woman that her husband died to allow her to remarry if she comes from the grain harvest and in the same country. Beis Shammai says she can come from any harvest or any country. A grain harvest was mentioned as that's what the discussed case was dealing with. Beis Hillel retracted his ruling to rule like Beis Shammai. The Gemara qualifies these opinions and cites the full case about the grain harvest, that some people went to harvest wheat and a snake bit one of them, and the wife testified about it, and there are related cases brought. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says when we say a woman can remarry from her own testimony that her husband died, she can also get her marriage contract. Beis Hillel says she does not. They argued on this. Beis Hillel retracted his opinion. The Gemara further debates these points. New Mishnah. Everyone is believed to testify for a woman that her husband died, besides for her mother-in-law, her mother-in-law's daughter, her co-wife, her husband's brother's wife, and her stepdaughter. They would be trusted to testify on her husband giving her a divorce document, as that's a written document. The Gemara says these women can't testify as they'd be hostile to the wife for various reasons, which are further explained. New Mishnah. If one witness says her husband died and she remarried, and then another witness says he did not die, she can stay with her new husband. If two witnesses testify that her husband is alive, she must leave her new husband. If two witnesses say he died and one says he did not, she can remarry even after this testimony. The Gemara clarifies points on these laws. New Mishnah. If two co-wives went overseas with their husband, and one says he died and the other says he did not, the one that said he died can remarry and collect her marriage contract, and the other one cannot. If they give different testimonies as to how he died, one saying he died naturally, the other saying he was killed, some say they can't remarry, some say they can. If one witness says he died and one says he did not, be they man or woman, she cannot remarry. The Gemara explains the logic of these cases. New Mishnah. If a woman went with her husband overseas, returns and says her husband died, she can marry and get her marriage contract, but her co-wife cannot remarry based on this. If the husband who vanished was a Cohen and the co-wife was a Yisrael, she'd still be allowed to eat teruma. Others disagree. If a woman went overseas with relatives and testifies that her husband and father-in-law died, she can remarry and get her marriage contract, and her mother-in-law cannot. Again, there's debate if she can still eat teruma in that circumstance. The Gemara explains the necessity of both cases, as there's variation based on the hatred between relatives. It also says we hold like the opinion that they can eat teruma, which is sourced. New Mishnah. If someone betrothed one of 5 women and he's not sure which, and they all say it was them, he divorces all of them and drops the marriage contract between them and just lets them figure it out. Others say he must give each of them the marriage contract. There's a similar argument if someone stole something from one of 5 people. Some say he just drops it off between them. Others say he must give one of it to each person. The Gemara again clarifies further points. New Mishnah. If a woman went overseas with her husband along with a child and then comes back alone saying the father died first and then the child, she's believed. If she said the son died first, thus requiring her to now do Yibum, she's not believed. To be safe, however, she must still do Chalitza. If she says that she had her child born while overseas, she's believed if she says the son died first, but not if she says the father died first, in which case she'd still require Chalitza to be safe. If she went overseas with her husband and says he had a brother born there and says both died in either order, she's believed. If the brother went with her overseas, she's not believed if she says both died in either order. This is explained. The Gemara cites some related discussion. It also says if someone gives a divorce document to his wife through a third party and there's conflict, we assume the woman would have preferred to stay married. Similarly, it says a husband who is extremely short or has an undignified profession, like combing wool, or has flawed lineage will all remain married, although there's a concern the wives will be unfaithful. And that's the end of chapter 15. Chapter 16, the final chapter of Tractate Yevamos, discusses some final laws on a widow whose husband vanishes overseas. The first Mishnah says if a woman's childless husband and her co-wife went overseas and she's later informed that her husband died, she cannot get remarried or do Yibum until she figures out if her co-wife was pregnant. If a woman's mother-in-law went overseas, there's no concern she has a child, requiring her not to do Yibum, unless the mother-in-law left while pregnant. Others say it's still not a concern. The Gemara further qualifies these points and opinions and debates their logic, and this is discussed further. New Mishnah: if the wives of two brothers return from overseas and they both say their husbands died, neither is allowed to marry somebody else out of concern their brother-in-laws are still alive. If one has witnesses, she can't remarry while the other one can. If one had children, she can remarry, unlike the other. If they did Yibum with their other brothers and those also die, there's debate if they're allowed to remarry. The Gemara discusses further similar cases, and they're additionally qualified. New Mishnah: in regards to testifying the identity of a dead man to allow his wife to remarry, they must have seen the form of the face, including the nose. Without this, they can't even testify based on identifying marks or the body or clothes. They can only testify if they see him actually die, not if he's just badly injured or even mid-hanging from a gallows or being eaten by an animal. They can only testify on the corpse if they saw it within 3 days of him dying. Others say the time frame is variable as it depends on the corpse or location. The Gemara further describes the necessity of which facial parts must be identifiable. It also says how you can't identify based on a body mark like a mole, which is debated. There are further specific points discussed, and it describes how a person in theory could survive a serious wound after being presumed dead through cauterization and similar. It also says you can testify that person died if you saw him being eaten by an animal at a vital part of his body, which is described as parts of his throat. This is further discussed. New Mishnah: if somebody falls into a body of water and is not seen to emerge, no matter the size of the body of water, he's not presumed to be dead. An incident is cited where somebody fell into a large water cistern and came out 3 days later alive. Some say based on an incident, if you see somebody submerged in water and you watch the bank for long enough for him to drown and he doesn't emerge, you can assume he died. There's also an incident where somebody was lowered into a sea and they retrieved only his leg, and it was said that he was only assumed dead if it was severed above the knee. The Gemara defines these bodies of water and cites some related incidents. It also mentions some other lethal events, disagreement if somebody falls into a pit of snakes if they're considered dead. It says somebody's considered dead if they fell into a pot of boiling wine and similar points. It also cites an incident where the daughter of a ditch digger fell into a cistern, so they kept going to the sage Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa for help, and he kept saying it was fine, and then the third time he said she had emerged, and she had, claiming that an old man with a ram had let her out. They asked Rabbi Hanina if he was a prophet, and he said, no, it just doesn't make sense that a righteous man should have his child punished through the good things he had done. This ditch digger's son, nevertheless, still died of thirst one time, as God is extremely exacting still, based on verses. New Mishnah: if a person hears somebody else saying that somebody died, he can testify that the man died. Some say even if he heard his kids saying that they were going to eulogize and bury him, it's allowed. These words are accepted whether they were intended as testimony or not. Some say we only believe an idol worshipper if they didn't intend to testify. The Gemara further clarifies these points along with citing some related cases, and this is discussed further. In New Mishnah: witnesses can testify that somebody died whether they saw him by lamp or by moonlight. You can also allow a woman to remarry if they just heard but didn't see somebody testifying to her husband's death, and it cites some particular incidents. The Gemara discusses these points, and it asks, what if the person that she heard was a demon? And it says that, in that case, it must be where she saw at least the man's shadow of a shadow, which it said that demons cannot fake. New Mishnah, it gives the list of all of the sages who argued whether we believe a single witness's testimony that a husband died, and all of the opinions on this. And the Gemara further discusses these opinions. New Mishnah: Rabbi Akiva said we don't allow the testimony of a woman, slave, or maidservant by these laws. It cites an incident which seems to imply otherwise, but Rabbi Akiva said that was where the witnesses brought many identifying possessions of the individual. The Gemara further discusses this incident with a few particular points and ends by quoting a verse which says that Torah scholars increase peace in the world. And that's the end of chapter 16 and the entire Tractate Yevamos.